Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee and this week I want to speak no evil. So I've recently had a couple of interesting conversations with friends and family members actually about the nature of online discussion. You know, a large portion of the content on this channel is all about encouraging conversation, and sometimes that can risk opening a can of worms. Like many online, I've had my share of trolls, but I ignore them, and really today's video is not about them. Instead, today I wanted to discuss the lifeblood of the wargaming community online: encouragement, support, collaboration, constructive criticism, and above all, advice. You know, I try to adhere to the basic principles: keep it polite and keep it positive when I'm writing for social media. It doesn't hurt to review what you've just written and ask yourself, would I say this to this person face to face? Now, like many wargamers, I have lots of social media, subscribe to several forums, and follow lots of blogs and YouTube channels. And inevitably, this means engaging with other users through the comment sections of those various media. And while most of the conversation is encouraging and supportive, there are some people who seem to be brutally honest in their assessment of other people's painted miniatures, or their gaming choices, or the periods they've chosen, or the scales they've chosen. Now, to be fair, I rarely see this in the historical wargaming community, certainly very rare here on this channel, although maybe I'm just not on the right feeds to see that sort of content. It is something that I have noticed on some forums and within other gaming communities, and I don't just mean followers of a certain evil high street empire. It is a truism that comments, and that is true across the internet, not just the gaming community, comments tend to get more honest when they are anonymous. Now, it's sadly true that we're in the golden age of the online troll, and it seems to me that in some forums and online in general, anonymous, unwanted and hurtful criticism has become more prevalent than ever before. I've written many times about not feeding the trolls, and it's still a subject I feel quite strongly about. This is all the more important in our hobby because, let's face it, we're an ageing bunch of old grognards, and if new gamers are to be encouraged into the hobby and not put off, we need to be encouraging and positive, otherwise the hobby will just die out with the current generation. Now, if we post pictures online, some degree of discussion is expected. That's part of the reason idiots like me write blogs and do videos like this. But I would never ever leave a negative feedback in comments, no matter how awful the paint job or how silly the decision. Positive advice, suggestions, recommendations are all of course acceptable, but it should always be given in a supportive and friendly manner, and polite. My rule of thumb is, if you haven't got something good to say, keep it to yourself. And I guess what I've been trying to say is that we all have a role to play in encouraging the continued good health of our hobby, especially online. All of us need to, just go a little bit more towards being civil towards our fellow gamers, but especially towards newbies who are entering the hobby for the first time. We also need to be a little bit more ready to encourage rather than just criticise. And if we have the chance to fan the fires of enthusiasm in a new gamer of any age, we should be ready to stand up and be candid. It's a fantastic hobby, so let's try and keep it thriving. So as usual, I want to throw this one out to you and ask, have you ever received unwanted criticism, and how did it affect you? In particular, I'm thinking about the online environment, but I suppose the same could be said about some face-to-face interactions. How do you tackle these comments, and has it shaped the way you behave online? And as always, of course, I would love to know what you think in the comments below. So much of this week has been consumed by preparation for Salute 51, which took place yesterday, of course. However, I have managed to get plenty of gaming in this week as well. At the start of the week, I took part in another online gathering with Jonathan Freitag. We played the Battle of Fornovo, which took place in 1495 during the Italian Wars. And as usual, Jonathan umpired the game, moving units in accordance with our orders and using the basic impetus rules. A little bit of background here. The victory at Seminara in 1495 by Charles VIII of France prompted the Italian states, namely Milan and Venice, to put their differences aside to address the threat that was facing them. Charles was marching his army north to re-establish his lines of supply with another army, and the Italians saw an opportunity. A coalition army from Milan and Venice and the Papal States rushed to the Apennines to ambush Charles before the two French armies could join together. The site chosen was on the Toro River Valley near the town of Fonovo, and this was the battle we were presented with on Monday evening. Now, the Taro River at this point is wide and rocky with very steep banks. However, most of the time water levels were low, and there were several fords which could facilitate the Italian crossing of the river. Unfortunately, there was a sudden storm and heavy rain in the mountains, and the Taro was beginning to rise dramatically. The Italian commander was committed to this ambush that he'd set by now, and having sent cavalry across the river to block the French advance down the opposite bank. So with the river beginning to swell, Gonzaga began his attack. So in our game, myself, Ray and Sergit commanded the Italians, with Ray taking command as Gonzaga. Our opponent, Chris, took control of the French forces, and the French army certainly looked smaller, but we were aware that we had there were some extremely good quality troops in amongst that, in particular mounted French gendarmes. Now, we started by moving our large pike infantry across the fords as our opening moves. To be honest, this wasn't our original plan. We had discussed sending our cavalry across first, but given that we only had 4 turns before it would become increasingly difficult to cross the fords as the river swelled, it was probably for the best. It probably also helped that from the French side of the river, such massive units all must have seemed to leap forward simultaneously to establish bridgeheads across the river. It must have been quite intimidating. Now, initially we attacked in the centre, but Sergit also used his light troops to harass the French on our right. Our opponent, meanwhile, was being let down by some terrible dice rolls. By the second turn, I think we were all feeling more than a little sorry for Chris. It genuinely felt like he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Until he did. It had taken me until the 3rd turn of the game to get my mounted men-at-arms across the river to protect the left flank of my infantry, because my pike block was so big it was blocking the ford until it could move out of the way. And of course, this was the moment when Chris unleashed his gendarmes. They came crashing into my cavalry, and Chris's luck briefly, oh so briefly, turned, and he rolled an impressive 6 sixes, sending my men-at-arms reeling back across the river in disarray. However, by this point we were pressing into the centre, and a stunning attack by Sergit into King Charles's bodyguard was beaten, and the king was killed. The French army continued to fight on, but to be honest, by this point their will to fight was being worn down, and soon after the army broke and scattered. Now, I strongly urge you to check out Jonathan's excellent write-up and pictures of the game. He took some really nice pictures. Obviously our photos are all via Zoom, so not so good quality, so I've tried to put some up as I've done this description, but check out his blog. So at the start of the Wargaming via Zoom, I ended the week with a different group of friends playing D&D via Zoom. Now, most of our group are very old friends, and I went to school with some of them, and once upon a time we would have gathered in person for our games. However, time, diverging career paths and living on different continents split the group up for a few years until COVID and the rise of Zoom gave us an opportunity to resume where we had left off. So on Friday, our band of adventurers set about solving a murder at a wedding that has been an interesting little side adventure within a much larger campaign that's been taking place for nearly a year now. It's a pity we can't get together and push miniatures around the table like we used to, but at least we can chat, catch up and slay some monsters online, playing a game we've all loved since childhood. So of course there isn't time to discuss the very end of my week and the Salute Show XL, which took place yesterday, mainly because I filmed this and edited this video on the Friday evening after my D&D game and before going to Salute. I knew I would be mad busy trying to put together my show video, and there was absolutely no way I was going to have time to do my regular Sunday video at the same time. Yeah, I'm good, but I'm not superhuman. Now, I fully expect that today, Sunday, I will be half comatose and popping painkillers to dull the agony in my crumbling knees. Hopefully I managed to get my show report done in a timely manner. It really does boost figures if you get it out quick. So if you haven't seen it yet, please do and let me know what you think. Okay, so we've got time for a book review. Now this week I wanted to review a book that was published in 2012 and seems to have gone a little bit under the radar recently. Destiny in the Desert, The Road to El Alamein was written by the respected TV broadcaster Jonathan Dimbleby. Now I had the hardback version and it weighs in at a hefty 544 pages, but I believe there's a paperback version as well. And I think it's well worth seeking out. Now I very much enjoyed the two-part TV documentary that accompanied the book, which was in 2013. And it was all about the build-up to El Alamein. And of course it was presented by Dimbleby. So when I saw this book I decided it would be very much worthwhile getting. Now there's been a growing trend in recent years for BBC correspondents to reinvent themselves as TV presenters with varying degrees of success, it has to be said. Jonathan Dimbleby's venture into this field, however, works really well because I think he's spent many years as an experienced frontline political correspondent and he knows a lot about this particular subject. He also has a personal connection to the events as his father, Richard Dimbleby, was also a correspondent for the BBC and was posted to the Middle East for the duration of much of the time covered by this book. The result is no mere retelling of the Desert Campaign, but an in-depth analysis of the personalities, decisions, conflicts, mistakes and realities of war that led to the turning point that was the Battle at El Alamein. Now, Jonathan Dimbleby has managed to look at the events of 1941-42 in a way that shows the big picture while maintaining the freshness of a news report. From a military history perspective, this book is more about the politics than military events, but reading it helps one to understand the context of the Western Desert Campaign in a way that few other books manage to achieve. The political machinations of Churchill, both his great insights and personal drive and his appalling interference in military affairs, are discussed in great detail in this book. Now I felt I knew the conflict in Egypt and Libya really well, but I found myself discovering new perspectives and shocking details of almost every turn of the page. Now one such revelation that has entirely changed my estimation of the supposedly great Desert Fox's ability to outthink his British counterparts. In 1940, a new military attaché to the US Embassy in Egypt was tasked with the duty of monitoring and reporting on British military operations in the region. He dutifully reported everything he learned about British strengths, positions, losses, reinforcements, supply situations, plans, morale, etc. to his superiors in American intelligence. But the code being used to encrypt the reports had been compromised and the Axis intelligence were able to read the reports within a matter of hours. Copies were in the hands of Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini and, more importantly, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. This massive security blunder handed Rommel an ace card in a high stakes poker game in which he was already a daring and dangerous gambler. British generals were often amazed at Rommel's instinctive ability to read the battlefield and exploit weaknesses. It turns out there was nothing instinctive about it. It was more often than not really good intelligence leading opportunism. Now, of course, this German intelligence bonanza came to an end when British cryptologists at Bletchley Park discovered the security leak sometime around the middle of 1942. The Americans are absolutely mortified at the realisation that their intelligence gathering had landed in the hands of the Axis leaders and quickly changed to a new, much tougher code for all communications. At the same time, Bletchley were feeding their ultra decrypts of German signals to the British High Command, and by the end of 1942, in time for the Battle of Alam Halfa and Second Alamein, the tables had been completely and decisively turned on the Axis forces. Now this is a really good book which I found to be very easy to read and all the more enjoyable for it. As a political correspondent, Dimbleby brings a clarity and perspective to the subject matter that avoids the dry and sometimes clinical approach that other authors often fall into. He presents the North African campaign in context, and clearly shows that this was no mere sideshow to the bigger conflict, but was actually a vital stepping stone in the destruction of the Axis war machine. And it is for this reason that I highly recommend this book. Okay, that's it for this week. Please join the conversation in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share. And if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling high.